Welcome, dear listener. Take a deep breath and allow your body to settle into stillness. The world outside may feel full of noise, of movement, of unfinished thoughts, but here together, we will step into a quieter place. Tonight, we will journey back in time, back to Renaissance Italy, more than 5 centuries ago. The air then was different, carrying the mingling scents of wax candles, fresh ink, and damp stone walls. The pace of life was both slower and yet, for some, endlessly urgent. Among those restless souls was a man whose name still echoes across the centuries: Leonardo da Vinci. You may know him as a painter, an inventor, or a dreamer of machines that seemed too wondrous for his age. But tonight we will look at a softer, quieter side of him. Not his bold strokes of paint, not his sketches of flight, but the way he closed his eyes. The secret patterns of his sleep. As we move together through 20 gentle reflections, you will be invited to imagine his world. The flicker of candlelight on parchment, the stillness of midnight streets, the quiet rhythm of his breath. There will be no need to hold on to every word. If your thoughts wander, let them drift as they please. If your eyelids grow heavy, allow them to close. Just as Leonardo returned again and again to short, peaceful rests, you too may drift in and out, carried by this story of sleep. So let us begin. Imagine yourself in Renaissance Italy. The year might be 1485, or perhaps 1500. The exact date does not matter, for the rhythm of life in those years was slower than ours, each moment flowing into the next like water through stone channels. The streets of Florence are hushed now. By day, they are alive with merchants calling, with the hoofbeats of horses and with church bells marking the passing hours. But at night, silence lingers. The only sounds are the faint creaks of wooden shutters, the occasional bark of a distant dog, and the gentle sigh of wind across tiled rooftops. Inside a modest chamber, lit by a single flame, Leonardo da Vinci prepares not for a long night's rest, but for something far shorter. His bed is there, of course, straw mattress, rough linen sheets, a woolen cover against the chill of stone walls. Yet he does not lie down and surrender to the night, as most do. Instead, he sits at a small table, his eyes heavy, his quill resting loosely between his fingers. The candle beside him burns low. Its wax is pooled and hardened, sending faint ripples of light across his scattered notebooks. Pages filled with sketches of mechanical wings, strange gears, and delicate studies of plants seem to breathe in the soft glow. But for now, the work pauses. Leonardo leans back, closes his eyes, not to drift into the deep, unbroken sleep of ordinary men, but into something gentler, a brief surrender, a pause between thoughts. Outside, the world remains awake in its own ways. Bakers preparing bread for the morning. Monks rising to whisper prayers in stone cloisters. Yet here, in this quiet room, only the rhythm of his breath matters. Slow, even, a quiet tide. This, perhaps, is the beginning of a secret ritual. Not the drama of a man collapsing from exhaustion, but the soft choice of closing his eyes for only a little while. Just enough to let his mind wander into places that paint and ink could not yet follow. Imagine being there in that moment. The silence is deep, the air faintly scented with oil, paint, and smoke. Leonardo sits in his chair, not fully asleep, not fully awake. The candle flickers once, then steadies. And for a few minutes, time itself seems to hold its breath. Soon, he will open his eyes again. The quill will move across parchment. Another sketch, another idea. But for now, there is only rest. A quiet beginning. In a life filled with restless wonder, picture Leonardo da Vinci, not as the distant figure of museums and textbooks, but as a man moving gently through the hours of his day. His life was not ordered in the way most of ours are, with neat schedules of work and rest. Instead, his hours flowed like water slipping through cupped hands, always moving, never quite still, never entirely predictable. When the sun rose over Florence, spilling light across the terracotta rooftops, Leonardo might already be awake. Perhaps he had been sketching through the night, or perhaps he had just stirred from one of his short, measured rests. He did not wake as others did, after a long, unbroken night of sleep. Instead, he stirred often, resting only in fragments, and working in between. Imagine the rhythm of such a life, few hours of observation at the marketplace, where he studied faces, gestures, and the way cloth folded in the wind. Then a brief pause, leaning back on a wooden chair, closing his eyes, breathing evenly for 15 minutes, perhaps half an hour. The stillness was not wasted time. It was a gentle pause that allowed his mind to settle, before rising once more into activity. In the workshop, apprentices might have whispered, unsure whether their master was sleeping or simply thinking with eyes closed. The line between the two was often blurred. One moment he was silent, resting, his breath slow. The next, he opened his eyes, lifted his quill, began to draw with sudden clarity, as though the image had been waiting for him in those quiet moments of near sleep. This rhythm work, rest, observe, rest again, was unlike the ordinary cycle of his peers. Most men slept long through the night, rising with dawn to labor until evening. Leonardo's body, however, seemed to follow the demands of his curiosity rather than the turning of the earth. He allowed his natural restlessness to guide him, dipping in and out of sleep whenever his thoughts required it. The streets outside may have carried their own rhythm church bells every hour, merchants calling at noon, processions moving slowly at dusk, but inside his chamber, Leonardo's hours stretched in a different way. It was as if he lived in a private time, marked not by bells, but by the beating of ideas. Consider, too, the toll this rhythm might have taken. His body must have known fatigue, his hands sometimes trembling from lack of deep sleep, and yet his mind was rarely still. Like a bird fluttering restlessly from branch to branch, Leonardo moved between observation, invention, and quiet repose. His genius did not flow in bursts of drama, but in steady, quiet persistence, fueled by the constant weaving of wakefulness and rest. Perhaps this was his true rhythm, not the rhythm of night and day, but the rhythm of a restless genius. A pattern of brief pauses and sudden awakenings, of silence broken by the scratching of quills and the gentle shifting of parchment. Imagine yourself there with him. You watch as he pauses, closes his eyes, and rests for a short while. The fire crackles softly, shadows move across the stone wall, and then almost before you realize, he opens his eyes again. His gaze is clear, his hand already reaching for the ink. Work continues. The rhythm of Leonardo's life carries on, always in motion, always returning to rest, but never for long. ... Some whispers in history suggest that Leonardo da Vinci lived by a curious rhythm of sleep, one not shaped by the long embrace of night, but by fragments, scattered across the hours of day and evening. This pattern today is called polyphasic sleep. But in his time, it was simply his way of surrendering to rest, piece by piece, without ever letting go entirely. Imagine him at work, surrounded by parchment, sketches, and unfinished ideas. Hours would slip by as he drew spirals, the veins of leaves, or the anatomy of a bird's wing. Then, quietly, without ceremony, he would pause. His head would bow, his eyes would soften, and he would drift not into a long dream, but into a fragment. A brief silence of mind, perhaps 20 minutes, perhaps half an hour, enough to rest his body and to let his thoughts rearrange themselves in the mysterious order of dreams. When he opened his eyes again, there was no grogginess, no hesitation. His hand moved almost immediately, quill scratching against parchment. The dream fragment seemed to live still in him, guiding the line of his drawing or the turn of his invention. It was as if the boundary between waking and dreaming had thinned, and he could step lightly across it again and again. This practice, if indeed it was his, creates a life of constant renewal. Short naps scattered through the day keep the mind alive, even as the body is denied deep slumber. Some who study such rhythms claim that creativity thrives in this half-lit state, where waking thought and dream mingle together. For Leonardo, it may have meant that his mind never truly rested, but also never truly tired. Picture the stillness of one of these rests. The candle is burning low, its flame steady, but fragile. In the silence, you hear only the sound of firewood cracking gently in the hearth. Outside, the city hums faintly, muffled by stone walls, the clatter of cartwheels, the voices of merchants closing their stalls, the faint echo of bells from a distant church tower. Leonardo hears none of it. He is somewhere else, eyes closed, breathing soft and even. In this suspended state, images drift like clouds, Perhaps he sees the beating wings of a machine not yet built. Perhaps he dreams of a river he once studied, its currents curling like patterns of hair or smoke. Perhaps he sees faces gentle, half-forgotten emerging, only to vanish again. When he awakens, these fragments may find their way into his notebooks, disguised as sketches of inventions or portraits. His naps were not simply rests, they were bridges. Bridges between waking and dreaming. Bridges between science and imagination. Bridges between what was known and what was only possible. Modern scholars debate whether Leonardo truly followed such a method, or whether the idea grew later, a legend shaped to explain his endless productivity. Some say he followed the so-called Huberman cycle, napping every 4 hours, 6 times a day, never sleeping longer than a single hour. Others say it was less strict, more natural, simply the rhythm of a restless man unwilling to lose his hours tonight. Yet whether deliberate or instinctive, the effect is the same. Leonardo seemed tireless. As others gave themselves fully to the deep, slow waves of sleep, he remained half awake, half dreaming, always near his work. Now, imagine how it must have felt within his body. Muscles weary, hands stained with ink, eyes burning from candlelight, yet the mind forever alive, refusing to quiet itself for long. The naps were whispers of rest, not the heavy silence of oblivion. His life became a mosaic of wakefulness and dream fragments, stitched together into one unbroken rhythm. Perhaps this is why his notebooks feel so alive, as though they carry both the logic of waking thought and the strangeness of dreams. Pages filled with flying machines, maps of rivers, delicate sketches of human muscles, all of it flowing seamlessly, as if drawn by a hand that never stopped to sleep in the way others did. The polyphasic whisper is just that, a whisper, a gentle suggestion that he lived in fragments of rest, each one brief, each one purposeful. Not the thundering certainty of proof, but the soft possibility that his genius was fed by sleep, as unusual as his imagination. And so, as you rest here listening, you might feel the gentle pull of his rhythm. The idea that you, too, could pause for only a few minutes, drift into silence, and return renewed. The body whispers for rest, the mind stirs with quiet images, and together they weave a rhythm not bound by night or day, but by the quiet need to dream. Again and again, step quietly in your imagination into Leonardo's workshop. It is not a single tidy room, but a sprawling space-stone walls holding in the cool air. Windows high and narrow, and long wooden tables crowded with tools, pigments, and scattered sheets of parchment. This is not a place of stillness. Even at night, even in the softest hours before dawn, the workshop seems alive. Here, apprentices move quietly, whispering to one another, careful not to disturb the fragile sketches drying on the tables. A faint smell of oil paint mingles with the sharper temps of metal filings. In one corner, a canvas rests unfinished, the image of a face slowly emerging from layers of paint. In another, wooden frames and wires suggest strange machines half-built, their purpose known only to their master. And there, at the center of it all, is Leonardo. He does not move in a straight path through his work. Instead, his mind circles, sketching here, adjusting a pigment there, pausing to carve a line into wood, then drifting back to a notebook. His tools seem scattered, but there is rhythm in the seeming chaos, a rhythm only he understands. Imagine the soundscape, soft scratch of quills across paper, the faint clink of glass jars being set down, the rustle of apprentices shifting materials from one table to another. Above it all, the steady breath of fire in the small forge at the back, glowing red even in the late hours. It is not silence, but a hushed, constant murmur, kind of heartbeat for the workshop. And yet, in the midst of this motion, Leonardo often does something unusual. He pauses. He leans back in his chair, or simply closes his eyes where he stands. The apprentices glance toward him, uncertain should they continue their tasks or wait for his instruction. But they soon learn that this is simply his way. Their master does not vanish into long nights of sleep. Instead, he takes these brief retreats, moments of quiet drifting, and then returns, suddenly awake, as though he had been touched by a new idea. Sometimes his nap is no longer than the flicker of a candle's wick. His head rests in his hand, his eyes close, and for minutes the world continues around him, while he seems to slip inward. Then, without a word, he rises, his hand already moving toward a sketchbook. He draws quickly, lines tumbling across the page, as though his dream had left him with an urgent gift. The workshop in this way never truly sleeps. Even in darkness, when the city outside lies silent and most households rest deeply, here the air still hums with quiet activity. A brush resting in pigment, a gear left unfinished on the table, a notebook waiting for ink, and Leonardo, half dreaming, half awake, guiding it all forward with his strange rhythm of fragmented rest. Think of how this must have felt to those around him. Apprentices, weary from their labors, longed for the comfort of their beds. They might glance toward the door, wondering when the night's work would end. But Leonardo remained tireless, pausing only in his peculiar way, short rests, brief silences, and then an explosion of thought once more. To serve in his workshop was to live in a place where the boundaries between night and day dissolved. The light of the forge mingled with candlelight. Shadows stretched across unfinished works. And while the rest of Florence slept under heavy blankets, here the pulse of creation continued, unbroken, endless. Imagine standing quietly in this room. You hear the steady drip of melted wax, the faint rustle of pages, the soft rhythm of Leonardo's breathing as he rests for a moment. His eyes are closed, his hand still holding a quill loosely between his fingers. Then, almost imperceptibly, he stirs. His eyes open, and before the apprentices can speak, he has returned to motion sketching, building, dreaming. The workshop itself seems to echo his nature. It is never silent, never asleep. It is a place alive with fragments of art, of invention, of fleeting rest. A place where time bends, where dreams slip onto paper, and where the genius of one restless man shapes itself in the quiet hours that others have surrendered to slumber. In the rhythm of Leonardo's life, the most telling moments were not always the bursts of genius, nor the dazzling sketches of machines and portraits, but the quiet intervals that lay between them. These were the pauses, the breaths of stillness that gave space for his imagination to shift from one vision to another. Imagine him sitting at his desk, his notebooks open, quill poised above a page. For hours he may have traced the curve of a wing, measured the mechanics of gears, or tested the strokes of paint upon a wooden panel. His concentration was deep, consuming, and unbroken. But eventually, as the flame of the candle trembled and his body leaned gently forward, he would stop. Not in defeat, not in fatigue alone, but in acceptance of a rhythm that required stillness as much as it demanded labor. These were the moments between inventions. He would close his eyes. Sometimes he rested his head upon folded arms. Sometimes he tilted back in a chair. Sometimes he remained upright, quill still in hand, as though ready to return at any second. To an apprentice watching, it may have seemed strange, their master not asleep in the full sense, but not awake either, suspended. And in that suspension, something important happened. It did not cease to think, but drifted lightly, collecting fragments of dreams, rearranging patterns, turning questions upside down and inside out. The fragments of sleep seemed to dissolve boundaries. In that half-lit state, there was no strict separation between art and engineering, between memory and imagination, between the known and the possible. Picture one such moment. The workshop is quiet, except for the low hum of firewood smoldering in the hearth. The tools on the bench rest silently, metal edges catching the candle's glow. Leonardo's eyes are closed. His breathing is slow, steady. In this short pause, time itself feels suspended. Perhaps in his drifting state, he sees once more the ripples of water on a river he studied weeks before. Perhaps he remembers the delicate feathers of a bird, their patterns shifting in the breeze. Perhaps he sees lines of architecture, arches, and columns that he once walked beneath. When he awakens, sometimes only 15 minutes later, his hand moves almost instantly. He draws a curve that mirrors the flow of water, a line that imitates the strength of a feather's shaft, a structure that echoes ancient stone. To the casual eye, these may seem unrelated sketches. But to him, they are fragments that belong to a larger pattern, one only visible when dream and wakefulness overlap. These moments between inventions are easy to overlook, yet they were essential. They are like the rests in a piece of music. Without them, the melody would be relentless, without shape or breath. With them, The music becomes whole, balanced, alive. Leonardo's inventions and paintings are like that music. Between each stroke, each experiment, each discovery, there was rest, quiet, stillness. His apprentices must have learned to expect this rhythm. One moment their master was awake, intense, questioning them sharply, sketching rapidly, demanding precision. The next, he was silent, still, and unreachable. His gaze turned inward, his body folded into temporary sleep. But they knew not to disturb him, for when he returned, he often carried with him something new. An insight, a correction, sketch so unusual it seemed to arrive from another world. And so the workshop breathed with him. Bursts of motion, followed by stretches of silence. Noise, then quiet. Creation, then rest. It was in the moments between inventions that the seeds of new ideas took root, watered not by effort alone, but by the quiet currents of dream. Imagine yourself for a moment, following this rhythm. You are working, your hands busy, your mind alive, and then you pause. You allow your eyes to close. You surrender to the silence for only a little while. When you return, there is something waiting for you, a thought, a connection, a possibility you had not seen before. This is the rhythm Leonardo lived by, not only in the inventions themselves, but in the spaces between them, spaces that whisper softly, reminding us that even genius requires silence. Even brilliance is born in pauses. Even the most restless of minds must sometimes drift gently into the quiet unknown. Midnight in Renaissance Italy carried a different weight than it does today. There were no electric lights spilling into the streets, no ceaseless hum of carriages or engines, no restless glow of windows awake at all hours. Midnight then was deep and quiet and layered with shadows. For most households, it was the heart of sleep, the hour of surrender. Yet for Leonardo da Vinci, midnight was often not an end, but a beginning. Imagine the city of Florence at this hour. Narrow stone streets lie silent, their cobbles glistening faintly with dew. Wooden shutters are closed tight, and behind them families lie curled in their beds, breaths rising and falling in rhythm. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of olive oil lamps extinguished earlier in the evening. Far above, the church tower stands against the sky, its bells waiting to chime, its outline softened by the glow of moonlight. And within a single room, his workshop, where sometimes a smaller chamber, Leonardo is awake. The flame of a candle flickers, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Wax drips slowly down its side, pooling into soft folds like frozen waves. The light it casts is not strong but gentle, does not banish the darkness, but coexists with it, carving a small circle of warmth in the vastness of night. In that circle, Leonardo bends over a notebook. The world outside is asleep, yet his mind is alive, his hand steady, his quill scratching softly against parchment. Each stroke is deliberate. He sketches the delicate structure of a bird's wing, the hollow shaft of a feather, the curve that grants it strength, the layering that allows it to catch air and rise. His eyes are sharp, his thoughts restless. Around him lies silence, but within him, flight takes form. This is the soft glow of midnight, not a blaze, not a storm of inspiration, but a steady flame, quiet and persistent. Leonardo does not shout his discoveries into the world. He records them in the stillness of ours, when others dream. His genius grows not in the noise of day, but in the calm spaces of night. Picture the atmosphere around him, the faint crackle of firewood, the whisper of quill on paper, the occasional creak of the wooden chair as he shifts his weight. Outside, the world is hushed, the streets nearly lifeless, except perhaps for a wandering cat or a guard pacing the city wall. Even the Arno River flows more quietly now, its currents dark and secretive under moonlight. At times, Leonardo pauses. His quill rests, his head lowers, his eyes close. He drifts into one of his short rests, his body surrendering briefly, his mind sinking into a fragment of dream. Perhaps only 10 minutes pass, perhaps 20. Then, with a faint stir, his eyes open again, and the quill dips once more into ink. As if no time has passed at all, the sketch continues, seamless, flowing, alive. For him, midnight was not a wall dividing day from day. It was a bridge. A bridge between waking and dreaming, between rest and labor, between the silence of the world and the noise of his own thoughts. In the soft glow of midnight, he found space that belonged to him alone. Consider, too, how unusual this must have seemed. While others clung to their deep, unbroken sleep, Leonardo rose and worked, his body sustained by fragments, his mind nourished by imagination. Did he feel lonely in these hours? Or did he feel most himself, free from distraction, accompanied only by candlelight and silence? In many ways, midnight gave him a gift. It offered him solitude. It gave him hours untouched by obligation, hours in which he could dream freely while still awake. His workshop became a sanctuary lit by flame, a place where inventions, paintings, and dreams took shape under the quiet watch of night. Now imagine yourself in that room. You sit nearby, watching the candle glow, listening to the steady scratch of quill against paper. The air is cool, touched with the faint scent of ink, wax, and wood. Time moves slowly here. Midnight does not rush toward dawn. It stretches, spacious and still. Leonardo works, then rests, then works again. And you too feel the pull of silence, the softness of light, the rhythm of breath that invites you to close your eyes and drift. The soft glow of midnight is not only his, it can be yours as well. A reminder that in darkness there can be peace, that in stillness there can be creation, and that even in the deepest hours of night, when the world is asleep, one mind can wander freely, carried by gentle fragments of rest. There is a certain sound to stillness, not the silence of emptiness, nor the absence of all things, but the delicate layering of quiet details that only emerge when the world has hushed itself. For Leonardo, in his late-night hours of work and rest, this sound was his companion. Imagine his workshop again. The candles burn low, their flames steady but small, each one surrounded by a faint halo of golden light. Beyond that circle, shadows rule, stretching long across stone walls, slipping into corners, merging into one another, until the room feels larger than it is. The stillness here is not lifeless. It is alive with subtleties. If you listen closely, you can hear it. The faint crackle of firewood as it releases its warmth. The soft drip of wax falling from a candle, cooling instantly as it touches the table below. The almost imperceptible rustle of parchment when a draft of air brushes past its edge. These are not noises meant to disturb. They are whispers of a living silence, gentle reminders that the world continues to breathe even when all is still. And there is Leonardo's own presence within this stillness. His breath rises and falls, slow and steady, like the rhythm of waves against a quiet shore. His chair creaks faintly as he shifts, then grows still again. When his eyes close for a brief rest, the room seems to grow even quieter, as though respecting his pause. When he awakens, the quill resumes its soft scratching, not breaking the silence, but joining it, another note in the composition of stillness. The sound of stillness was not only external, it was also internal. Within Leonardo, the restless noise of daytime, the chatter of apprentices, the clamor of Florence's markets, the ringing of bells from the cathedral faded away at night. In its place came a subtler rhythm, the quiet unfolding of thought. Ideas rose, not as shouts, but as murmurs, drifting gently from one to the next. The silence around him was mirrored by a silence within him, space where fragments of dreams and visions could meet. Imagine what it must have been like to drift in and out of sleep in such an atmosphere. To close your eyes, hearing only the faintest sounds, feeling the air still and cool against your skin. In those moments, the mind softens. Thoughts loosen their grip, and new images begin to form. A flying machine, half dreamt. A new study of anatomy, half remembered. A portrait, half seen in shadow. The stillness does not block these things. It invites them. And yet silence is rarely complete. Sometimes the world intrudes even into the quiet hours. A distant dog barking, its voice carrying through narrow streets. The echo of footsteps on cobblestones. A guard making his nightly rounds. The soft toll of a church bell marking the hour, reminding the city of time, even as it sleeps. For Leonardo, these interruptions were not disturbances. They were part of the music. Each small sound was woven into the tapestry of stillness, reminders that he was awake in a world that continued to turn. There is something profoundly human about this being awake, when others are not. Sitting in a pool of light, surrounded by silence, aware of the faintest sounds, aware of one's own breathing, it is a solitude that is not lonely, but intimate, a solitude that speaks, gently, to the deepest parts of the mind. Perhaps this is why Leonardo thrived in such conditions. The sound of stillness gave him room to listen to the whisper of his own imagination, to the quiet voice of dreams, to the subtle connections that daytime noise might have drowned out. He lived not only in the rush of creation, but in the spaces between, where stillness could be heard, and where stillness itself became a companion. Now, as you listen, you might hear echoes of that same stillness, the faint hum of your own surroundings, the rhythm of your own breath, the silence between these words. All of it part of the same gentle composition, the same sound of stillness that once kept company with Leonardo. Let yourself rest in it. Let the silence grow wide around you, soft and unbroken. Like Leonardo, you may find that within stillness, there is not emptiness, but abundance. Not absence, but presence. Not nothingness, but the quiet from which all ideas begin. Balance is a fragile thing. Too much rest, and the fire of energy dwindles. Too little, and the body weakens, unable to carry the weight of thought. Leonardo da Vinci lived on this delicate edge, forever testing the boundary between wakefulness and slumber, between exhaustion and renewal. Imagine his days stretched long, filled with ceaseless sketches, dissections, experiments, designs, and endless streams of ideas. A lesser man might have collapsed into the heavy embrace of sleep each night, surrendering to the body's demand for long hours of stillness. But Leonardo divided his days and nights into fragments, short wakes, short rests each, one like beads strung on an endless thread. The rhythm was unusual, did not always lie down fully as others did. Often, he leaned back in his chair, letting his eyes close just for a while, the muscles of his body slackening only enough to allow brief recovery. These were not sleeps of surrender, but pauses of balance, calculated or perhaps instinctive. Each nap gave just enough relief to keep his body moving, while his mind refused to dim. Picture the moment when he awakens from one of these rests. His eyes open slowly, not with the heaviness of someone torn from deep slumber, but with the calm clarity of a man who has floated near the surface of dreams. He does not stretch or groan. He simply rises, as though no time has passed, and resumes his work. For him, wake and rest were not opposites but companions, woven together in a single, continuous flow. This balance, however, was not without cost. The human body craves deep cycles of sleep, the kind that repair and restore. One might wonder, did Leonardo's bones ache from fatigue? Did his eyes burn with the strain of candlelight? Did his hands, so steady in drawing, tremble ever so slightly after too many nights of shallow rest? These questions linger unanswered, for history offers no record of his private struggles. Yet we sense that such a rhythm, fragile and demanding, must have exacted a price. And still, the balance was not all burden. There were gifts in this strange rhythm. By rising and resting in fragments, Leonardo encountered moments most men missed. The hush before dawn, when the city is still wrapped in shadows, the dim glow of stars that few awake long enough to see, the quiet turning of the world when day surrenders to night, and night back to day again. He lived within those thresholds, those in-between spaces, where inspiration often hides. Think of balance not as perfect symmetry, but as a shifting scale, tilting gently one way, then the other. Leonardo's balance was like this, never fixed, always in motion. A short rest tilted him toward recovery. A long stretch of sketching tilted him back toward creation. His life was not a steady rhythm of day and night, but a dance, with steps light and unending, circling endlessly between effort and repose. And within this dance, there was harmony. His mind was nourished by the fragments of dreams gathered in those naps. His body, though tested, adapted to the rhythm. His spirit seemed never to tire of discovery, as though curiosity itself sustained him more than food, more than rest, more than any comfort of ordinary life. Balance, in his world, was not comfort but possibility. It was the ability to stretch hours, to live more fully within each day, to find moments of stillness even when awake, and flashes of imagination even while resting. His balance was not a compromise, but a redefinition of what it meant to live, to think, to dream. As you listen now, perhaps you too can feel something of this balance. The rhythm of your own breath, steady and unbroken. The gentle drift of your thoughts, wandering between wakefulness and the edge of sleep. The balance is there, in you as it was in Leonardo. A quiet negotiation between body and mind, between rest and wakefulness. Allow yourself to lean into it. Let your thoughts wander like his, carried softly on the tide of imagination. Let your body rest while your mind drifts, just enough to feel both alive and at ease. This is the balance Leonardo lived, by the balance of wake and rest. Dreams are never whole. They arrive in pieces, brief flashes, fading images, soft voices that vanish the moment we awaken. For Leonardo, who lived in a rhythm of short rests and wakeful bursts, dreams may never have unfolded into long stories. Instead, they came as fragments, scattered jewels of imagination, each one waiting to be gathered and set into the crown of his work. Imagine him closing his eyes for one of his brief intervals of rest. The candle still burns nearby, casting warm circles of light on the walls. His body leans back, not fully surrendered, but relaxed enough to drift. In those moments, the mind loosens and visions begin to form. Perhaps it is the image of wings, stretching wide, not bird nor bat, but something between, an echo of the flying machines he sketched so often. Perhaps it is the face of a stranger, softened by shadow, gazing with quiet mystery, later to emerge as a figure on his canvas. Perhaps it is nothing more than the shifting geometry of light and darkness, patterns that lingered in his notebooks as diagrams of perspective. These fragments are small, but powerful. Each one might last only seconds, dissolving as quickly as it appeared, yet Leonardo carried them forward, weaving them into his waking work. He did not treat dreams as idle fantasies, but as resources, as hints of what might be possible, glimpses into realms where imagination and reality touched. Consider the notebooks he filled with endless sketches. Within them are designs that feel dreamlike even now, machines that flap their wings like birds, vast bridges spanning impossible distances, weapons of strange design, and studies of water flowing like ribbons. These visions might not have arisen from careful planning alone. They bear the mark of the dream, fragmented, fluid, unconstrained by the rules of the waking world. The beauty of fragments lies in their incompleteness. They invite interpretation. They ask the waking mind to finish the picture. Leonardo, with his restless creativity, became the interpreter of his own dream fragments. A half-glimpsed image of motion might become the foundation of a machine. A fleeting impression of light might become a new technique in painting. A vague dream of soaring might become a study in anatomy and flight. There is a tenderness in this process. Dreams did not arrive to him as commands or revelations. They were whispers, soft and fragile, like petals drifting on water. To catch them required gentleness. To use them required patience. Leonardo treated his fragments with care, recording them, reshaping them, allowing them to breathe within his art and science. But there is also mystery. How much of his genius was born in waking effort, and how much in these moments of half-sleep? Was the famous smile of the Mona Lisa a reflection of some fleeting dream face, glimpsed once and never again? Was his fascination with flight seated in a childhood dream, nourished night after night in fragments of sleep? We cannot know for certain, yet the question itself speaks to the profound connection between dreams and creation. In this way, Leonardo's short naps were more than rest, they were gateways. Each one opened onto a liminal space, neither waking nor dreaming fully, where fragments could surface. In that borderland, imagination flowed more freely, unbound by reason, untethered by the weight of reality. It was in these in-between states that Leonardo lived much of his creative life. Even today, we know this borderland. It is the moment just before sleep, when thoughts blur into strange shapes. When faces or places appear without warning, when the ordinary becomes extraordinary. We often drift past these moments without noticing, but Leonardo lingered there, again and again, gathering what others lost. Now, as you listen, you might feel the same. The edge of wakefulness softens. Images rise and fall within your own mind, brief, uncertain, fragile. Do not chase them. Let them pass as Leonardo did, fragments carried on the tide of rest. Some may return in memory, others may dissolve forever, yet all of them, even the smallest, have their quiet beauty. For Leonardo, dreams and fragments were not flaws, they were gifts. Pieces of a puzzle that could never be completed, but that guided his hand nonetheless. And perhaps, even now, as centuries separate us, we too can sense the echo of those fragments, soft, fleeting, eternal in their incompleteness. There are mysteries that cling to history, stories whispered across centuries, half-truths woven into legends, tales too compelling to dismiss, yet too uncertain to prove. Leonardo's unusual way of sleeping belongs to this realm, a supposed method of dividing sleep into fragments, of resting in short intervals rather than surrendering to the long embrace of night, has long fascinated those who study him. And yet, as with so many aspects of his life, the truth is elusive. Was this truly a conscious method, or was it simply the natural rhythm of a man whose mind refused to rest? Some say Leonardo deliberately practiced what we now call polyphasic sleep, a schedule of short distributed rests that, in theory, granted him more hours of wakefulness each day. According to this version of the story, he might sleep for only 15 to 20 minutes at a time, repeating this cycle every few hours, gathering in total only a fraction of the rest most people required. If so, then his days stretched wide, filled with hours others spent in bed. The method would have given him more time for painting, for study, for experiment, for invention. Paints a picture of discipline, of calculation, of a genius consciously bending his body to serve his restless imagination. But others are less certain. They remind us that history leaves no clear record of Leonardo's sleep. His notebooks, vast as they are, brimming with sketches and observations, do not offer detailed accounts of his rest. There are hints, perhaps, scattered references, observations of fatigue, comments on the nature of sleep and dreams. Yet nowhere does he state directly that he lived by such a schedule. Could it be, then, that the story is less fact than myth? A tale invented by later admirers to explain how one man could accomplish so much? Myths, however, are not born without reason. Even if Leonardo never declared such a method, his life itself seemed to invite the story. He was tireless, endlessly curious, forever working, forever observing. He began projects without end, pursued studies in every field, filled thousands of pages with thoughts and designs. To those who came after, it seemed almost impossible that one man could have lived so fully within the same measure of time allotted to others. Surely, they thought, he must have stolen hours from sleep itself. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Leonardo did not follow a strict method with clocks and cycles. Perhaps instead, he simply followed his body, resting when he needed, working when inspiration struck, unbound by the rigid patterns of night and day. In a world without electric light, where darkness often dictated the rhythms of labor, he created his own rhythm, bending time to his will, and yet mystery remains. The very lack of certainty adds to the allure. We cannot know how many hours he slept, nor how deeply. We cannot know whether his method was deliberate or instinctive. What we do know is this: he left behind not only art and invention, but an image of a life lived differently, a life that seemed to transcend the limits of ordinary time. This uncertainty gives rise to reflection. Why does the question of his sleep matter so much? Perhaps because it touches on something universal: the struggle to find enough time. We, like Leonardo, feel the pressure of fleeting hours, the weight of days too short for all that we desire to do. His supposed method, whether fact or myth, speaks to a longing within us to live more fully, to carve out more moments for creation, for thought, for wonder. There is also a gentler lesson hidden in the mystery. Even if Leonardo's sleep was fragmented, even if he stole only moments of rest, those moments were enough. They carried him through. His genius did not require endless hours of labor, but balance, however, fragile between wake and rest, between body and mind. The method, mysterious though it may be, reminds us that creativity often lives in the spaces between, in the pauses, in the fragments of stillness. As you reflect on this, imagine yourself seated with Leonardo in the quiet of his workshop. He rests, eyes closed, for a few breaths. Then he awakens, sketches a new design, notes a new idea. You ask him how he manages such tirelessness, how he finds the strength to do so much. He does not answer with rules or schedules. He simply smiles, perhaps, and returns to his work. The mystery remains, and perhaps that is as it should be. Some truths are best left as whispers, hovering in the space between certainty and wonder. Leonardo's sleep is one of them. Whether method or myth, fact or fable, it continues to captivate us, reminding us that the lives of great minds are never entirely visible, never entirely knowable. The mystery itself becomes part of the story, part of the dream. So let the question linger. Do not seek to resolve it. Let it drift in your thoughts as Leonardo's fragments of sleep once drifted into his. The mystery of the method is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be felt quietly, gently, like the pause between waking and dreaming. In the stillness of Renaissance nights, there were others awake besides Leonardo. Across stone walls and quiet cloisters, monks rose from their narrow beds to pray. Long before dawn, bells would sound softly within monasteries, summoning them into darkness. Their steps echoed in cold hallways, their chants rising in measured tones. Like Leonardo, they shaped their lives around fragments of sleep and wakefulness, not bound by the single stretch of night that carried most people into morning. The monks divided their nights into sacred intervals. Hours were marked not by the rising of the sun alone, but by devotion, by prayer, by discipline. They would wake, kneel, chant, then rest again for a short while, only to be summoned once more. This rhythm, austere yet gentle, resembled Leonardo's pattern. Both he and the monks lived in fragments, moving between wake and rest, between action and stillness, between thought and renewal. But their purposes differed. For the monks, the fragments of night were given to God. Each interruption of sleep was an offering, a return of time and energy to devotion. For Leonardo, the interruptions were not sacred, at least not in the same way. His devotion was to knowledge, to curiosity, to creation itself. Yet the similarity remained striking. Both found meaning in the quiet hours, both embraced a rhythm unfamiliar to most, both discovered richness in what others might consider disruption. Imagine the contrast. In a monastery cell, a monk kneels, his lips moving in quiet chant. The candle flames steady beside him, across the city, in a workshop filled with sketches and tools. Leonardo leans back in his chair, eyes closing for a brief rest, or else opening to sketch a new thought that had just visited him. Two lives, different paths, yet both moving through the same silence, the same darkness, the same rhythm of broken sleep. There is a tenderness in these comparisons. Neither man sought comfort in the way most did. Both exchanged the deep rest of long nights for a life divided, a life lived in fragments. And yet, what seemed sacrifice to some was richness to them. The monk found nearness to the divine. Leonardo found nearness to the vast unknown of nature and imagination. Both sought transcendence, though by different names. The monastery itself becomes an image of this rhythm. Thick stone walls, cloisters dimly lit, the sound of sandals on cold floors. The hours punctuated by bells, gentle but insistent. Sleep was never deep, but neither was it denied. Came in pieces like bread broken and shared. Leonardo's life mirrored this, though his bell was the call of his own restless mind, summoning him again and again to creation. One might wonder, did Leonardo ever think of monks when he shaped his days and nights? Did he notice their patterns of wake and rest, their ability to weave prayer into the fabric of time? He was no stranger to religion. He lived in a world steeped in faith. Perhaps he observed them, perhaps even admired them. Or perhaps the similarity was coincidence, a natural alignment between restless genius and spiritual discipline. And yet, the comparison invites reflection. Both ways of life suggest that time need not flow in one unbroken stream. It can be divided, shaped, redirected. Sleep need not be a single surrender, but a series of pauses. Wakefulness need not belong to the daylight alone, but can thrive in the deep hours of night. In their own ways, both monks and Leonardo revealed the flexibility of human life, the many rhythms we are capable of inhabiting. For the monks, the result was prayer whispered into darkness, words rising toward heaven. For Leonardo, the result was sketches, notes, inventions, and visions that stretched far beyond his age. Two forms of devotion, one to God, the other to creation, yet both nurtured in silence, in fragments. In the tender balance between sleep and wakefulness. Now, as you rest here, listening, you may sense the same kinship. Your breathing rises and falls as theirs once did, steady, simple, grounding. The quiet around you is not unlike theirs, a silence alive with subtle sounds. You too may find yourself moving between wake and rest, thought and drifting dream in the same gentle rhythm. In this way, the comparison is not only between Leonardo and monks, it is between them and us, between the past and the present, between all who have sought meaning in the quiet hours of night. Their fragments of sleep remind us that the night is not empty, but full of possibility, whether for prayer, for creation, or simply for rest. For all his brilliance, for all his restless imagination and tireless work, Leonardo da Vinci was still human. His body of flesh and bone, of muscle and breath, carried the same needs as ours. However lofty, his thoughts soared. However boundless his ideas appeared, he was not immune to fatigue. He lived within the same limits that shape us all. And in those limits lies another kind of story, the story of a body in need of care. Imagine him after long hours, bent over parchment, ink staining his fingers, shoulders hunched as he sketched line after line. The candles burn lower, the air grows heavy with smoke and wax. His eyes strain in dim light, his hand tightens with effort. At such moments, the body would whisper its reminder. Enough. Muscles ache, eyelids droop, the heart slows with weariness. Yet Leonardo often ignored these whispers, pushing forward into the night, seeking one more discovery, one more design. The human body longs for deep rest. It asks not only for pauses, but for the full rhythm of sleep, the descent into slow. Quiet waves where cells repair, where memory is stitched together, where breath deepens and heartbeat steadies. Without this, the body falters. Minds grow clouded, bones grow heavy, the smallest tasks feel immense. We may wonder then, did Leonardo feel these things? Did he wake some mornings with a dull ache in his back, with eyes that burned, with thoughts that struggled to take shape? History is silent on this. His notebooks brim with ideas, not confessions, recorded anatomy in meticulous detail, the workings of muscles, tendons, bones. He studied the mechanics of flight, the flow of water, the curves of the human form. Yet he did not describe his own fatigue, his own private struggles with rest. Perhaps he considered them unworthy of note, or perhaps he accepted them as the natural price of his relentless pursuit. Still, his body must have carried the burden. No mind, however brilliant, can entirely escape the needs of its vessel. The heart needs steady rhythm, the lungs need breath, the muscles need renewal. Without care, the body protests, not loudly at first, but gently, insistently, like a candle guttering in the wind. Consider the long walks Leonardo often took through fields and hills, observing plants, water, birds. Perhaps these were not only studies of nature, but a form of care for himself. To leave the workshop, to breathe fresh air, to stretch weary legs, to let his eyes rest on landscapes instead of parchment, these, too, may have been his medicine. Though he did not name it so, one can imagine the contrast. Within the city, his body endured smoke, cramped rooms, endless hours of focus. Beyond the walls, among rivers and trees, his senses opened again. The smell of damp earth, texture of leaves, the sound of water over stones. These experiences were not separate from his genius. They restored him, reminded his body of what it needed, even if briefly. And what of food, of nourishment? We know Leonardo often wrote about diet, even keeping notes on what was consumed. Some accounts suggest he favored simple meals, perhaps even leaning toward vegetarian habits. Did these choices sustain him, or leave him weaker? We cannot know for certain, but the question lingers. Was he caring for his body, or only for his mind? There is a lesson here, whispered through time. Creativity demands much, but it cannot thrive in a body utterly depleted. Balance must be sought, not only in thought, but in flesh. Leonardo's life reminds us of this paradox. He gave himself endlessly to work, and yet his body, fragile and finite, required gentleness, required renewal. How he managed this balance remains part of the mystery. Perhaps he was sustained not by long nights of sleep, but by the sheer vitality of curiosity. Perhaps inspiration itself became his nourishment, carrying him further than ordinary men could endure. Yet even so, he must have felt moments of heaviness when his hands trembled, when his eyes blurred, when his body longed simply to rest. Now, as you reflect, consider your own body in this moment. The weight of your head on the pillow, the slow rhythm of your breath, the heaviness that draws you toward rest. These are not weaknesses, they are the body's wisdom. It's quiet reminders of care. Leonardo, too, would have known this whether he admitted it or not, whether he yielded to it or resisted it. And so, in his story, we glimpse not only genius, but humanity. A man who dreamed vast dreams, yet lived within the boundaries of a body that needed care. A man who sought to fly, yet carried bones that tired and eyes that dimmed. A man both extraordinary and ordinary, bound, as we all are, to the fragile vessel of flesh. There is a time of night when silence deepens, when even the busiest cities seem to exhale and grow still. It comes in the hours before dawn, those fragile moments when darkness has lingered too long, yet morning has not yet risen. For Leonardo, these were not hours of surrender. They were hours of possibility. Imagine him seated near a narrow window, its shutters partly open. Outside, the streets of Florence lie deserted, their cobblestones damp with night's breath. No footsteps, no market cries, no ringing of hammers on iron. Only stillness, vast and unbroken. The air carries a coolness, sharp yet gentle, wrapping him like a cloak. His candle burns low, a soft companion, while above the faintest stars still gleam, waiting to fade. These hours belonged to no one. The city slept, monks had returned to their cells after prayer, the world held its breath. In such stillness, Leonardo found his own rhythm. He would lean forward, ink-stained quill in hand, sketching the curve of a bird's wing, or the outline of a new machine. Or perhaps he would lean back, eyes heavy, surrendering to a brief doze. In either state wakeful or resting, he moved within the hush of the pre-dawn world. The quiet hours before dawn hold a peculiar energy. They are neither night nor day, but something between. The body feels both weariness and renewal. The mind drifts between clarity and dream. In this borderland, thoughts flowed differently, less constrained, more fluid, as if freed from the rigid order of daylight. Leonardo thrived here. His notebook seemed to carry the imprint of these hours, sketches both precise and dreamlike, ideas both practical and impossible, visions caught between shadow and light. Consider the sounds of that time. A distant cock crowing, faint yet insistent, the rustle of wind against rooftops. Perhaps the gentle lapping of water in a nearby well, each sound magnified in the stillness, each one marking the approach of morning. Leonardo, sensitive to detail, would not have missed them. He might have paused to listen, to mark their rhythm, to note their place in the great harmony of nature. There is also the light, soft, gradual, imperceptible at first. The eastern horizon begins to pale, a faint line of silver rising against the darkness. Shadows shift, outlines sharpen. For most, this light signals the end of sleep, the stirring of daily life. For Leonardo, it might have marked another pause, another decision, to close his eyes for a final short rest before the city awoke, or to seize the moment and continue, carried by the inspiration of dawn. The quiet before dawn has always been revered. Poets, monks, wanderers all have spoken of its mystery. For Leonardo, it may have been both sanctuary and stage. A sanctuary because it sheltered him from distraction, wrapped him in solitude, allowed his mind to wander freely. A stage because it invited performance. The act of creation, of bringing forth ideas while the world slumbered. And yet, within this atmosphere, there is also tenderness. Picture him weary yet content, pausing his work to gaze out at the paling sky. His hands rest on his knees, ink smudges on his fingers. His breath moves slowly, evenly, carrying the weight of the night just past. He does not rush, he does not strain. He simply exists in the quiet hours before dawn, a man alone with his thoughts, with his body, with his dreams. Perhaps it was in these moments that he felt most balanced. Not fully awake, not fully asleep, but drifting between the two. The city silent, his own spirit alive. Time seemed to stretch here, giving him a freedom denied by the measured hours of day. Within this freedom, he captured visions that endured far beyond his lifetime. Now, as you listen, you too are close to that space. The world around you grows quieter, the breath of night still lingering, the thought of morning just beyond reach. Your own body feels the same rhythm Leonardo once knew, the heaviness of sleep, the persistence of wakefulness, the gentle drift between them. The quiet hours before dawn remind us of this truth. There is beauty in transition. There is meaning in the spaces between. Leonardo lived in those spaces, gathering inspiration not from extremes, but from the soft edges of time. And perhaps as you drift now, you too can touch that same quiet, letting it carry you into your own fragments of dream. When you picture Leonardo da Vinci, perhaps you imagine a finished painting, a masterwork framed in perfection, the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, or a carefully rendered drawing of anatomy. But for every work that reached completion, dozens remained unfinished. His life was not a series of polished results, but of endless beginnings, a restless current that carried him from one vision to the next. Imagine the wooden desk in his workshop strewn with parchment. Some sheets bear careful sketches of machines, pulleys, wheels, and delicate gears interlocked in elegant designs. Others show the soft outline of a face half completed, the shading interrupted by some new thought that pulled his hand away. There are studies of flowing water, spirals of smoke, diagrams of the human heart, and beside them, pages abandoned midline. It is as if the very air of his chamber was crowded with possibilities, too many to be captured in a single lifetime. Leonardo's sleep mirrored this restless pattern. Just as his nights were never long, unbroken stretches, his projects were never neat, contained endeavors. Instead, both followed the same rhythm: fragments, pauses, sudden bursts, and quiet returns. He would close his eyes for a few minutes, wake with a vision, and turn to a fresh page. Each nap carried the seed of a new idea. Each waking moment tempted him to begin again. The flow of his projects was not disordered, was abundance. He did not abandon because he lacked discipline, but because the world around him offered too much to be captured at once. Imagine the streets of Florence, alive with color, sound, motion. Children chasing hoops, merchants shouting, fountains splashing. To Leonardo, each moment was a lesson. The curve of a child's smile could become a study in expression. The pattern of rippling water could become a sketch of turbulence. His notebooks were a mirror of this living world, endless and always expanding. And yet within this abundance, there was also frustration. Patrons often pressed him for completion, begging for paintings that would never be finished or machines that would never be built. Leonardo's gaze, however, always drifted forward. He was less concerned with finishing than with discovering, less concerned with perfection than with possibility. His projects were not final destinations, they were bridges, stepping stones across the river of imagination. Picture him in the quiet of evening, surrounded by works in various states of becoming. To one side, a half-assembled model of a flying machine. To another, a canvas with outlines but no color. On the table, open notebooks, each one calling for his attention. Leonardo moves from one to the other like a bee among flowers, never lingering too long, never exhausting the nectar of a single bloom. His life, like his sleep, was a mosaic of fragments that together formed something vast. In the stillness of his workshop, you might hear the scratch of his quill paws, followed by a sigh not of despair, but of wonder. The world seemed too wide for his hands, too complex for one mind, and yet he never stopped trying to gather its pieces. Even as fatigue pressed on his body, even as short rests carried him into dreamlike drifting, his projects continued to flow. The endlessness of Leonardo's work teaches us something tender, that incompletion is not failure, but part of being human. Each unfinished sketch still carries beauty. Each fragment of an idea still reflects curiosity. Leonardo's notebooks remind us that life itself is never truly completed, is always unfolding, always in motion, always asking for one more glance, one more note, one more attempt. As you listen, you may feel a quiet kinship with him. Your own life, too, is filled with fragments, dreams half pursued, tasks unfinished, thoughts left for another day. Like Leonardo, you move between beginnings and pauses, between effort and rest. And in this rhythm, there is peace. The flow of endless projects was not a burden to him, but a rhythm of existence. Just as his naps were bridges between ideas, his unfinished works were bridges between moments of understanding. To live endlessly in beginnings is to live always in discovery. And perhaps that is why, centuries later, we still imagine him at his desk. Parchment scattered, quill in hand, eyes both tired and alive. Moving gently from one idea to another, carried forever by the flow of endless projects. Across the centuries, Leonardo da Vinci has been more than a man. He has been a mirror, reflecting what each generation longs to see. Genius, mystery, discipline, or even eccentricity. Among the many stories that surround him, few are as quietly fascinating as the tale of his unusual sleep. Did he truly divide his rest into fragments, slipping into short naps instead of surrendering to long nights of slumber? Or is this rhythm only a myth whispered into being to explain how one man could have accomplished so much? Historians, with their careful pens and cautious voices, have never agreed completely. Some point to his vast notebooks, their pages overflowing with sketches, diagrams, and reflections. Surely, they argue, no ordinary rhythm of sleep could have allowed such output. To live in fragments of rest must have given him more hours, more waking moments to capture the restless tide of thought. Others, however, shake their heads gently. They remind us that even Leonardo, with all his brilliance, was bound by the needs of his body. No man, however extraordinary, could cheat the laws of nature entirely. Consider the words passed down through biographies of his time. Some suggest he was always at work, always awake, his hand rarely still. Yet these accounts are colored by admiration, written to exalt him as more than human. Did those writers record truth, or did they allow reverence to shape their memory? Perhaps Leonardo's reputation for sleeplessness was as much symbol as factual way of saying his mind never rested, even when his body surely did. The debate unfolds like a quiet conversation in a library. On one side of the long wooden table sit those who believe the story. Leonardo, master of polyphasic sleep, carving time into fragments so his creativity never paused. On the other side sit the skeptics. Leonardo, like any other man, dozing deeply when exhaustion demanded it, his naps mere necessity rather than method. Both sides speak softly with respect, as though neither wishes to disturb the mystery itself. What is most revealing is not the answer, but the persistence of the question. Why do we so dearly wish to know? Perhaps because we see in Leonardo a reflection of our own longing to do more, to think more, to live more fully within the hours given. If he could stretch his days by resting lightly, perhaps we too might borrow time from sleep, trading dreams for moments of creation. And yet the gentlest truth may be that genius is not measured in hours awake, but in the depth of attention given when awake. Imagine Leonardo himself listening to this debate across centuries. He might smile faintly, amused that his scattered rests and drifting naps had become the subject of such discussion. He would know the secret, that sleep and waking were never separate states for him, but threads woven into the same fabric. His drowsy pauses, his sudden bursts of focus, his drifting between dream and pagel were simply his way of being. And so the debate continues. Each historian leans in, offers another fragment of evidence, then leans back again. No conclusion is ever final, just as Leonardo's projects were rarely complete. The story itself becomes like one of his notebooks, filled with ideas, half-finished arguments, lingering questions. Yet in this gentle uncertainty lies comfort. To know everything would be to lose the wonder. The myth of Leonardo's strange sleep invites us not only to question, but to dream. It allows us to imagine him as more than a man bound by ordinary cycles. It allows us to see him as a figure half in shadow, half in light, drifting between wake and rest, between history and legend. As you reflect on this, you may find your own thoughts drifting too. The debate does not demand resolution. It invites only curiosity. And like the slow rhythm of breathing in a quiet room, it reminds us that not all mysteries must be solved. Some are meant to be held gently, like a candle flame in the dark, offering warmth without needing explanation. The gentle debate of historians, then, is not about truth or falsehood. It is about the stories we choose to tell, the ways we try to understand genius, the comfort we find in imagining a man who never truly slept. Whether fact or fable, the tale lingers, soothing in its uncertainty, just as Leonardo himself lingers. Centuries later, in the space between knowledge and mystery, step for a moment beyond Leonardo's chamber, beyond the quiet desk and flickering candle, and you will find yourself in the wider world of Renaissance Italy, a world that pulsed with life. The 15th and 16th centuries were times of transformation, where art, science, commerce, and belief intertwined to create a tapestry as vivid as any fresco. This was the world Leonardo inhabited, a world that surrounded his hours of rest and wakefulness with constant motion. Imagine walking through the streets of Florence in his day. The stone pathways are uneven beneath your feet, polished by centuries of footsteps. Dawn breaks slowly over the rooftops, painting them in gold, while vendors begin to stir. Soon, voices rise in overlapping chorus, bakers pulling loaves from hot ovens, their scent drifting into the air. Fishmongers, calling out the freshness of their catch from the Arno. Cloth merchants displaying bolts of rich fabric dyed in hues of crimson, indigo, and emerald. The air is thick with mingling aromas: warm bread, sharp cheese, pungent spices, and sometimes the faint metallic temps of iron from a nearby forge. These streets were alive with more than commerce. They were alive with ideas. In workshops and guild halls, apprentices studied their crafts. In churches, sermons thundered about morality and salvation. In palaces, patrons whispered about politics and power, plotting how to strengthen their families' legacies. At every corner, there was movement, exchange, and ambition. And in the midst of this world moved Leonardo. Sometimes as a participant meeting with patrons, studying in markets, observing architecture. Other times as an observer leaning quietly against a wall, sketchbook in hand. Capturing the curve of a hand gesture, the drape of fabric, or the angle of a tower against the sky. To him, Florence and later Milan were not merely cities, but living classrooms. Every detail was a lesson, every moment a chance to study the intricate design of existence. Yet while the world outside moved in predictable cycles, the tolling of bells at every hour, the swell of markets at noon, the hush of prayers at vespers, Leonardo's inner rhythm was different. His life was not measured by bells, but by inspiration. While others slept deeply through the night to wake for morning labor, Leonardo slipped in and out of short rests, rising in the quietest hours when the city fell silent. As Florence bustled with life, he often sought solitude. As the city rested, he often awakened. He seemed always just slightly out of step with the world around him, inhabiting a parallel rhythm. Consider the contrast. Outside, the laughter of children in courtyards, the chatter of women at wells, the clatter of hooves on cobblestones. Inside Leonardo's chamber, only the scratch of a quill, the rustle of parchment, the soft exhalation of his breath as he leaned back into a fleeting nap. The city roared with energy, but his world remained hushed, tuned to subtler notes. He did not resist the energy around him. Instead, he gathered it, translating the movement of people into sketches, the play of light into paintings, the murmur of conversation into reflections on the human soul. The Renaissance was an age of grandeur, but it was also an age of contradiction. Wealth and poverty lived side by side. Palaces gleamed with frescoes, while the poor carried baskets of bread, praying for enough to last the week. Scholars debated philosophy in universities, while peasants worked the land as they had for generations. This tension between brilliance and hardship formed the background of Leonardo's life. Perhaps his restless rhythm was not merely a personal trait, but a reflection of the world itself, a place both vibrant and unsettled, both ordered and in constant flux. To live in such a world was to live in a storm of inspiration. Patrons demanded great works, cities demanded innovation, and nature demanded observation. Leonardo answered with fragments never fully resting, never fully finishing, always moving forward. In the Renaissance world around him, there was no shortage of things to see, to imagine, to begin. His fragmented sleep mirrored a fragmented age, one that was constantly building, yet never complete. Picture once more the streets of Florence at sunset. The sky glows orange and purple, bells echo from the Duomo, and people gather in taverns to share food, laughter, and news. Somewhere nearby, Leonardo slips away from the crowd, his mind already turning inward. While the city settles into its nightly rhythm, he returns to his notebooks, his small naps guiding him through the hours. In the world around him, there is noise, color, and company. In his private world, there is silence, ink, and solitude. Both are part of the same Renaissance tapestry, one vibrant, one hushed, yet woven together. And as you imagine this, you might feel the rhythm of your own world softening. The hum of daily life around you, the noise that fills your waking hours, begins to fade. What remains is the gentler sound beneath, the rhythm of your own breath, steady and calm. Just as Leonardo found quiet within the Renaissance storm, you too can find stillness within the movements of your own day. There is a quiet tenderness in the act of pausing, closing one's eyes, and surrendering to even the briefest slumber. For Leonardo da Vinci, these short rests were not interruptions, nor were they failures to keep pace with the world. They were, instead, gentle interludes, moments of beauty hidden in the rhythm of a restless life. Picture him seated in his workshop, parchment scattered, quill resting idly in his hand. The fire burns low, casting golden light across the wooden table. His eyelids grow heavy, not with defeat, but with release. He leans back, breath slows, and for a few precious minutes, time seems to stop. In this pause, there is no pressure, no unfinished commission, no impatient patron waiting for results. There is only stillness. To Leonardo, the brief sleep carried its own richness. The body restored itself in fragments, the mind drifted into dreamlike states, and the boundary between thought and vision softened. Even a nap of 10 or 15 minutes could deliver images, faces, landscapes, flying machines that slipped effortlessly into his waking sketches. The brevity of these rests gave them intensity, like concentrated drops of dream distilled into his imagination. Consider how different this is from the heavy weight of a long night's sleep. Deep rest carries us into hidden realms, leaving little behind when we wake. But brief sleep is fragile like a thread of silk. It does not erase the waking world. Instead, it weaves itself lightly into it. One hears the faint crackle of fire, feels the wooden chair beneath, even while drifting into a dream. In that delicate overlap lies a particular kind of beauty and awareness that one is resting, and yet still connected to life's quiet details. In these short naps, Leonardo may have found a harmony between body and mind. His body received the pause it needed, while his mind remained alive, receptive, and open. Dreams did not vanish into darkness. They hovered near the surface, easily recalled, easily shaped into lines of ink upon waking. What others might have dismissed as mere drowsiness became, for him, a fertile ground of inspiration. There is also something profoundly human about the beauty of brief sleep. Every culture, across ages, has known its value. Farmers in the fields leaned against trees to rest in the afternoon sun. Sailors on long voyages closed their eyes for moments between shifts. Monks, rising to pray at midnight, returned to their cells for fragments of slumber before dawn. In Leonardo's naps, we glimpse not only the uniqueness of his genius, but also the shared rhythm of humanity, the universal need for pause, for breath, for renewal. Imagine him now, in the silence of midnight. His brush lies across a half-finished sketch of a wing, its feathers captured with delicate precision. His head tilts forward, chin resting lightly against his chest. His breath moves evenly, the workshop quiet except for the faint rustle of paper as a draft stirs the pages. To anyone watching, he might seem vulnerable, even ordinary, a man asleep. Yet within that brief sleep lies the seed of extraordinary visions, ready to bloom the moment he wakes. The beauty of brief sleep lies also in its humility. It does not demand ours. It does not overwhelm. It arrives quietly, offering only a handful of minutes, and yet those minutes may change everything. For Leonardo, they carried entire worlds. The tilt of a smile, the arch of a bridge, the dream of a machine that might one day lift men into the sky. As you reflect on this, you may notice the same rhythm in your own life. Perhaps you, too, have closed your eyes for a short pause in the afternoon, only to wake with a fresh sense of clarity. Perhaps you know the sweetness of those minutes, when rest arrives not as deep surrender, but as a gentle companion. These moments remind us that rest does not need to be grand to be meaningful. Even the smallest pauses can carry beauty. In Leonardo's endless journey of thought and creation, the brief sleep was like punctuation commas placed delicately in the long sentence of his life. Not full stops, but pauses that gave shape, rhythm, and music to the flow. Without them, the story of his days would have been rushed, breathless, unbalanced. With them, his life gained cadence, each nap softening the edge of wakefulness, each rest offering space for the next thought to form. So, when we think of Leonardo da Vinci, let us not picture only the grand paintings or the detailed notebooks. Let us also imagine those quiet, fleeting moments when his eyes closed, his breath deepened, and time itself seemed to lean gently against him. In those brief sleeps lay not only beauty, but also the secret harmony between rest and creation, a lesson as timeless as his art. Centuries have passed since Leonardo closed his eyes for his fleeting naps, yet the story of his unusual rhythm continues to ripple through time. Today, in our world of electric lights and glowing screens, people still whisper about his habits, still wonder whether imitating his way might unlock hidden reserves of creativity. His brief sleeps, his restless schedule, have become more than fragments of history. They are echoes, reverberating into our own age. In modern times, scientists and enthusiasts alike have explored what they call polyphasic sleep, the practice of dividing rest into smaller segments, scattered across the day and night. Books have been written, experiments attempted, entire online communities built around the pursuit of squeezing more waking hours from the clock. Some call their systems by names that sound almost like incantations: the Huberman schedule, the everyman method, the Dymaxion cycle. Each promises a way to live more like Leonardo, alert in the dark hours, awake when others sleep, creating in the quiet stretches between. Imagine an office worker, weary of long nights filled with half-finished projects, deciding to try what Leonardo is said to have done. She sets an alarm for every few hours, closing her eyes for only 20 minutes at a time. At first, fatigue presses heavily, but then something shifts. Dreams grow vivid, almost immediate, and waking feels sharper, at least for a while. She tells herself she is touching the secret of the Renaissance genius. Yet with time, her body protests. The experiment falters. The world, after all, is not built for those who sleep in fragments. Meetings do not pause, streets do not grow quiet, and dawn does not wait for rhythm to align. Others, however, find gentler adaptations. Naps during the afternoon become creative sanctuaries. Writers close their eyes for a short while and wake with paragraphs flowing. Musicians pause between rehearsals, their melodies enriched by fragments of dream. Even those who do not attempt strict polyphasic sleep sense the value of these echoes, the beauty of stepping briefly into silence, then returning renewed. Science, with its careful instruments, has also sought to unravel the mystery. Researchers tell us that short naps can sharpen memory, enhance problem-solving, and even spark creativity. They point to stages of sleep: light, deep, rapid eye movement, explain how even brief moments can grant access to the dream-rich stage that nourishes imagination. In this, modern knowledge circles back to Leonardo's practice, offering validation centuries after his passing. Yet beyond productivity, there is something more tender in these echoes. Leonardo's rests remind us of the simple human truth that pauses have value. In a world that often glorifies constant motion, his example invites us to honor stillness, even if only 4 minutes. To rest is not to waste time, but to shape it, to allow the mind to breathe, the body to soften, and the spirit to wander freely. Think of the modern city at night. Neon lights flickering, cars humming, screens glowing in countless windows. Amid this ceaseless brightness, there are still individuals who lean back, close their eyes, and surrender to brief sleep. They may not know it, but they echo Leonardo's rhythm. They rest while the world rushes on, and when they wake, they carry fragments of dream into their work. There is also the cultural echo, the way his story continues to inspire. Writers use it as a metaphor, the genius who never fully slept, is always straddling the border between wake and dream. Motivational speakers invoke his name, urging listeners to seize more hours, to live more fully. Artists create works imagining him napping in his workshop, candlelight soft upon his face. Each echo reshapes the tale, sometimes stretching truth, sometimes honoring myth. Yet in every telling, the core remains. Leonardo, resting briefly, dreaming deeply, then rising to create. But perhaps the most profound echo lies not in imitation, but in reflection. We hear his story and ask ourselves, how do we balance rest and creation? How do we find beauty in the pauses? His naps remind us that sleep need not be seen as an enemy of productivity, but as its quiet ally. Even in fragments, rest can nourish. Even in brevity, dreams can inspire. As you listen now, in the quiet of your own space, you may feel these echoes stirring within you. Perhaps your eyelids grow heavy, and you are reminded that a short rest, even now, holds value. Perhaps you are struck by the thought that your own pause, your own unfinished dreams carry beauty as surely as Leonardo's did. The echoes of his brief sleep reach us not because they promise a secret method, but because they remind us of something timeless. That to live fully is to balance motion with stillness, thought with dream, work with rest. Leonardo da Vinci, centuries removed from us, becomes in this way not a distant figure, but a quiet companion. His rhythms, once lived in the flickering glow of Renaissance candlelight, still breathe softly in the glow of our modern world. History is filled with questions that can never be answered completely, and Leonardo's unusual sleep remains one of them. So was it truly his chosen method, carefully designed to unlock more hours of wakefulness? Or was it a story, whispered and reshaped across centuries, meant to explain what otherwise felt inexplicable: his boundless creativity, his restless pursuit of knowledge? As we move closer to the end of his story, let us dwell for a while in this uncertainty, as one might linger in twilight, when day has not yet faded fully into night. The records we have are few, scattered like fragments of a dream, a remark in a letter here, a note in a journal there, recollections from those who lived near him. They paint a picture, but never a complete one. Some describe a man who rarely seemed to sleep, always sketching, always calculating, always chasing thought. Others hint at his exhaustion, at his frailty, at moments when his body appeared burdened by the demands he placed upon it. Imagine Leonardo himself, listening to these stories centuries later. Would he smile at the myths that grew around him? Would he deny them gently, or perhaps allow them to stand, understanding that legends can sometimes speak a truth deeper than fact? For whether he truly divided his nights into fragments or not, the image of him doing so has shaped how we remember him, half in this world, half in dreams. There is a kind of poetry in this uncertainty. For Leonardo, so much of life was unfinished. Paintings left incomplete, inventions sketched but never built, thoughts written in mirror script as though intended for no one but himself. His sleep, too, seems to follow that pattern, never whole, never resolved, but broken into pieces, like his projects, like his visions, like the restless current of his mind. And perhaps this is why the story endures. Because even if it is not entirely true, it feels true. It aligns with what we know of him, the man who could not contain his own brilliance within the usual limits of time and rest. The man who reached beyond what a single life could hold. Yet gently, we must also wonder about the cost. If Leonardo truly lived by fragments of sleep, did he know moments of deep weariness? Did his heart strain under the burden of too little rest? Did he ever long for a full night's sleep, unbroken and complete, the kind of sleep that carries the body into healing silence? Or did he accept the fatigue as part of the price of living so intensely, of seeing so much, of dreaming so vividly? Historians continue their quiet debate. Some argue that the stories are exaggerated, a myth invented long after his death. Others find patterns in his notebooks, suggesting rhythms of work and pause that match polyphasic cycles. Yet no document tells us for certain. The truth rests somewhere between, hidden in shadows, elusive as a dream upon waking. There is, however, a gentle beauty in leaving the question unanswered. To accept uncertainty is to embrace mystery, and Leonardo's life, after all, was filled with mysteries. He was a painter who studied anatomy with the patience of a surgeon, an engineer who wrote poetry, a dreamer who designed machines centuries ahead of their time. His sleep, like his art, resists definition. Consider your own breathing now, slow and steady, perhaps heavier than before. In this rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, you may feel a kinship with Leonardo's uncertainty. For sleep itself is always uncertain. You never know when dreams will arrive, what images will come, what fragments we will remember upon waking. In this way, each night is a gentle mystery, much like his life. And so, the uncertainty softens rather than disturbs. We need not know every answer, need only imagine. A man resting briefly in candlelight, his face serene, his mind adrift. Whether he lived this way always, or only sometimes, the picture remains calm, elusive, eternal. Uncertainty itself becomes a companion here. It reminds us that life is not made only of clear answers, but also of questions that drift, like whispers in the night.
Oh.
And in listening to those whispers, we find not agitation, but rest. That. In the end, Leonardo's sleep is as much symbol as fact. A reminder that even genius requires pauses. A suggestion that creativity, like dreams, may arise most vividly in moments that cannot be measured. A mystery that continues centuries later to invite reflection. And perhaps as your eyes grow heavy now, you too can allow yourself to rest in that uncertainty. To accept the unknown not as a problem to solve, but as a comforter, soft place where thought can drift without conclusion, where imagination can wander freely. Leonardo's life leaves us with many questions, but in this one, the question of his sleep, we may find something unexpectedly soothing. For sometimes, the unknown is not a barrier. Sometimes, it is a lullaby. Centuries have drifted past since Leonardo da Vinci closed his eyes for the final time, yet the image of his sleep still lingers, fragmented, uncertain, and endlessly evocative. Tonight, as we arrive at the last part of our journey, let us rest with him in that eternal night. Imagine the candlelit rooms of Renaissance Florence slowly darkening. Brushes are set aside. Notebooks filled with sketches, words, and half-dreamed inventions remain open on the desk. A soft hush settles across the city. Outside, the world moves forward, but within these walls, Leonardo leans back, eyelids heavy, surrendering once more to rest. This is not just an ordinary sleep. It is the endless night, the final chapter in a life lived across boundaries, between waking and dreaming, between the possible and the yet impossible. For centuries, people have imagined what it was like for him to dream. Fragments of flight, vast machines, graceful anatomy studies, delicate faces painted with unfathomable expression. Did those visions come to him in the quiet of his naps? Did they accompany him into that last, unbroken rest? There is a solemn beauty in picturing Leonardo, not as the tireless genius always awake, but as a human being finally permitted to rest without interruption. No more alarms, no more hurried sketches before dawn, no more restless stirring at midnight. Only silence and the boundless expanse of eternal sleep. Yet even in this stillness, his presence endures. His notebooks remain, their ink preserved. His paintings, though few, hold a gaze that feels alive centuries later. His inventions, whether built or not, shaped imagination far beyond his time. And so, in a way, he does not sleep alone. Each of us who remembers his name, who ponders his methods, who marvels at his curiosity, we sit quietly at his side, keeping vigil in his endless night. Think of how his story mirrors the rhythm of night itself. The day brings light, movement, conversation. Then twilight comes, shadows lengthen, the world slows. Finally, darkness gathers rest, renewal, stillness. Leonardo's life followed this rhythm, but with a tempo entirely his own. Many beginnings, few completions, constant awakenings, brief pauses, never a full stop until the end. The endless night became, at last, a completion of what life left unfinished. And yet, paradoxically, his night is not empty. For in that silence, his ideas continue to echo. Each time someone studies his sketches, attempts his inventions, or gazes into the enigmatic smile of the Mona Lisa, a spark from his restless mind stirs again. The night becomes endless not because it is devoid of waking, but because it contains within it the potential for infinite dreams. There is also a tender lesson here. Leonardo's fractured sleep, whether real or myth, teaches us that rest and creation are never truly separate. Dreams feed ideas, stillness nourishes work, and even when life ends, the dream can continue in the memory of those who come after. The endless night of Leonardo is not simply a finality, it is a continuation, a dream that has expanded beyond his own body, beyond his own century, into ours. Perhaps you can feel it now, in your own breathing, in the slow rhythm of your pulse. Leonardo's night meets your night. His pauses meet your pauses. Across centuries, there is a shared humanity in the act of closing one's eyes, surrendering thought, drifting into the unknown. Sleep binds us, gently across time. Imagine him one last time, seated near the window of his workshop. Candlelight flickers across scattered pages. He lays down his quill, folds his hands and exhales softly. His head tilts, eyes close, and silence enfolds him. The workshop remains filled with half-finished wonders, but Leonardo himself is finally at rest. The night deepens, the dream lengthens, and though his body sleeps forever, his visions continue to awaken within us. The story ends, but gently, without conclusion. For the endless night of Leonardo is not a closing door, but an open horizon, an invitation to dream further, to imagine more, to rest deeply. And as you listen, perhaps already drifting, you may find comfort in this thought. That like Leonardo, you carry within you a world of dreams. Some may remain unfinished, some may linger in fragments, but all are part of the gentle rhythm of life. And when the night comes, whether for a moment or for eternity, it is not an end, but a passage. The endless night of Leonardo reminds us that even sleep can hold creation, and even silence can hold meaning. And now, in your own quiet, you are invited to join him not in wakeful striving, but in peaceful rest. And now, as we reach the final resting place of this long journey, let us pause together in silence. We have traveled across centuries into the flickering candlelight of Renaissance Italy, into the restless mind of Leonardo da Vinci, and into the delicate rhythms of his unusual sleep. What began as whispers of short naps has grown into a meditation on life itself, and how we work, how we dream, how we rest. Leonardo's habits, whether entirely real or partly imagined, have guided us through a landscape both intimate and infinite. We have seen him drift into moments of slumber in his workshop, surrounded by tools and scattered papers. We have heard the silence of midnight broken only by the faint crackle of firewood. We have wondered with him, doubted with him, and dreamed alongside him. And now, as we close this story, we are left with something that feels less like history and more like timeless reflection. In the quiet rhythm of his polyphasic whispers, we discovered that sleep is not merely absence. It is presence of another kind, the presence of renewal, of imagination, of hidden connection. For Leonardo, every pause was a bridge. Each brief closing of his eyes carried him from one sketch to another, from one invention to the next, from the world of waking into the softer realm of dream. His life, incomplete yet magnificent, reminds us that our own pauses are not failures, but part of the larger pattern. As centuries unfolded, his story echoed into our age. We saw how modern dreamers try to imitate him, experimenting with schedules, testing the limits of the body, seeking the same wellspring of inspiration. Some succeed, briefly, many stumble, but all reveal the same longing, to live more fully, to create more deeply, to capture just a little more of the endless spark that seemed to glow within him. Yet what his story truly leaves us is not a method, but a meditation. It is not a schedule to follow, but a reminder to embrace the value of stillness. Leonardo's nights remind us that work and rest are not enemies, but companions. His unfinished projects remind us that incompletion can also be beautiful. His uncertain sleep reminds us that mystery has its own gentle place in life. And now, as you rest in the quiet of your own space, you may feel these truths settling softly within you. The rhythm of your breath slows. Your body, like Leonardo centuries ago, yields to gravity, to silence, to rest. The story has carried you far, yet gently, it brings you back here, to your own bed, your own night. Let us reflect once more. Life, like Leonardo's art, is rarely complete. We begin many things, we finish some, and many remain fragments. But fragments, too, hold beauty. A sketch unfinished can still inspire. A dream half-remembered can still guide. Pause, even brief, can still renew. And perhaps this is why Leonardo's fragmented sleep speaks so powerfully across time. Because all of us live in fragments. Moments of energy, moments of stillness. Hours of work, minutes of pause, nights of deep rest, or nights of restless turning. Life is not seamless, but patchwork. In that patchwork, there is quiet splendor. Think again of the city outside his window. Florence, alive with footsteps and voices, carriages and bells. Beyond the noise, one man leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and surrendered to a dream. That image, fragile yet eternal, remains with us. For in imagining him, we learn to imagine ourselves differently, not as machines always in motion, but as beings who require both light and shadow, both waking and sleep. Now, as centuries stretch behind us, and your own night stretches ahead, you are invited to rest as he did, not with concern for what is unfinished, not with fear of what is unknown, but with quiet acceptance that rest itself is part of creation, and that dreams, whether brief or endless, carry meaning. The story of Leonardo's sleep does not end with him. It continues now, in you. As you lie here listening, you two drift between waking and dreaming, between thought and silence. Your pauses, your breaths, your own gentle rhythms, these are your masterpieces in the making. So close your eyes, let the fragments settle like pages upon a desk. Let the whispers of history soften into silence. Let the candlelight fade into darkness. And in that darkness, know that you are not alone. You share the rhythm of rest with countless others across centuries, with Leonardo, with dreamers, with all who have ever paused to let the night embrace them. Sleep then becomes not just an ending, but a passage. A gentle doorway from effort into ease, from noise into quiet, from thought into dream. And so, as you drift, may you carry with you the gentle lesson of Leonardo's endless night. That rest is not surrender, but continuation. That even in stillness, you create. That even in dreams, you live. Now breathe slowly. Let go. Rest deeply. The night is yours.